So I imagine entering into any role takes a certain amount of concentration and commitment, but is there something special about playing the director's parents?
She looks like
Well, yeah. This was a huge responsibility. I mean, I think you. This is a room full of actors, right?
Yes.
Okay, guys, let's talk.
You always feel a huge responsibility to serve any piece of material, but I think in this case, because it's such a personal film, because I think James was wagering so much and putting so much of himself on the line, and because the writing has such a level of specificity, the work to become an authority on the character yourself was in this case really challenging. There were a lot of barriers to entry because he's the authority. And so I think we had to find a way to get enough from him and internalize that and make it our own and then kind of set it free.
Which is an interesting thing about James, because it was about removing the concept of authority for me, because he's not an autocratic dictator, director. That coffee didn't work. He's not an autocratic director. Or dictator, you're right. He believes in the process. That said, this is clearly a very full film. And so for me, everything Jeremy said is absolutely true. My approach was different, because it wasn't just the sort of thing that you can just charge headfirst in and let your passion for acting guide you. I was talking to someone about the tenderest parts of their life, and a relationship that clearly is very, very complicated and might still be healing. And so I just felt, as an actor, I don't know, I just approached it differently in that way. I felt like direct questions were somehow, I wasn't worried about being impolite or gauche or any of those things, but I felt like direct questions, there was something about them that I couldn't bring myself to do. They felt too savage in a way. Does that make sense?
It was kind of, the whole thing was like the game of Operation, and here we are kind of probing around, his internal, one other thing.
Inconsiderate, that was the word I was looking for, and I just showed it to everyone. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
James was sort of, he's not here so I can talk about him, but he in a way was withholding. I think he only wanted to give us so much and not too much of that source material. And because he didn't want us, in his words, to play, to do some impersonation of his parents, and nor did we. But I guess one is always looking for a kind of access point or some tonal center around which you can build a character. And in this case, it didn't feel sufficient to just create that out of imagination. It felt necessary to kind of find some kind of sound capture, person capture of who these people were, and that was an interesting process.
May I just add one thing? I know we're loquacious. So the man that your character was based on was living when we filmed this, but obviously Hester, the woman that Esther was based on, she's not with us anymore and hasn't been for a long time, and life has continued and the family has continued to grow and change. And it was wonderful. I met her grandchildren at the premiere, and they gave me a hug, and they were like, I saw my grandmother, like I saw the stories come to life. I've never had that experience before, so that part is new for me and different than anything else I've ever done before, to meet the legacy, the idea that this is something that happened and life has continued.
That was exactly going to be my next question. Were there any source material for you, audio perhaps, that you were able to bring to your?
Yeah, I mean, voice is everything. I think kind of, not accents. Hopefully, the hope is it's never an accent; it becomes your voice. But I, I got on a plane. I was living in Copenhagen, and I got on a plane to New York because I was like, if I don't put a digital tape recorder in somebody's hand and just go after this, I'm not going to get what I need. And it did feel like that Nina Simone thing of like, don't give them what they want, give them what they need, because that's not what he wanted. He didn't want any accents in a way at all. But it felt, on the page, it's that thing that Stella Adler said, sometimes you have to be as large as life. These are kind of big characters. There's something really vivid about them, and they have size, and there is that patois of a certain kind of dialect from that place. So yeah, I put a tape recorder in James's wife's hand, and she kind of spied for me and asked Irwin the Proust questionnaire, which gave a great array of things about a person and how they see the world. And James's children taught me this Yiddish camp song that he had done for them when they were growing up. And I remember the night before we started shooting, we're sort of like still kind of incubating, figuring out what you're going to do, and until you show up on the first day, you haven't really crossed the Rubicon and committed to what you're doing. And I always have the feeling of like, is this ridiculous? Is this going to work? Am I going to get fired? And so I recorded this Yiddish camp song in an audio message and sent it to James. And that was sort of the most frightening moment of the whole process, really, because it was as Irving, and I thought, he's either going to be like, what the fuck is this? Or he's going to say, okay.
It was interesting because James, I think we all got to a new place together because there was, we had to figure out how to turn a no into a you don't know what you want. And so the thing that James kept saying was, I don't want dims, dems, does. I don't want the actors out there going dims, dems, does. He had like this real fear of it. But Jeremy and I are like, but this is a world, and I loved your use of the word patois. This is something. So while Jeremy was like finding the voice from the real person, I was like, Jeremy, send me voice memos. So we worked in concert together to figure out what the sounds are, because there is a certain sound that results from a marriage, from just being in the same home every single day, from being each other's primary source of conversation. So we built that, and then James heard it and then liked it.
Something about language that becomes a terrain, but also this film really captures Queens and 1980. And so a question for you guys, how much does costuming and production help you enter into a character like that?
I think it helps you as much as you're able to tell the truth with it. Because I think, especially with a period film, there's this tendency to try to over-communicate with the visual information. Like, and I recently, has anybody here seen the film The Hand of God? I loved what Paolo did in that, because certain shots you could be in any time. And yet when you looked at the real granular detail of it, you knew that you were in the 1980s. And I just remember being so struck by that, and that was what we were going for in this one, something that felt familiar and really truthful, but also invisible and hopefully timeless.
It definitely feels timeless, but also authentic. And I love that you bring up Hand of God, because we are experiencing, I guess by coincidence, this moment where we're seeing a lot of autobiographical films from directors. There's Licorice Pizza, there's Bardo, there's The Fabelmans, this film. And I don't mean to lop them all in together, but do you think that there's something special about being presented with that kind of a mid-range story? They're not really made that often.
Can you define mid-range?
I mean mid-budget.
Oh, isn't it great? I love a mid-budget movie. I came of age cinematically in the 90s, so a mid-budget movie was everything. It's so exciting. And you know what I found out recently? In Europe, the government greenlights mid-budget movies. You can make like a movie about human beings for $30 or $40 million, which is insane. Like, it's so rare. So we certainly didn't have it for this one, but to get to use the word terrain, I thought that was beautiful. To get to travel across this terrain, the terrain of emotion, to use those muscles, to ask those questions, and above all, to just really ignite your compassion and your imagination at the same time. It was really important, and I believe in cinema as a really important part of our culture, and that's part of the magic of it, and that's one of the reasons why I just adore it, is because it lets you go to that place where it's imaginative and compassionate at the same time.
It's interesting that all these films are being made right now. I think when I read the script for the first time, the thing that I was most struck by was, oftentimes autobiographical films, there can be something 1 + 1 = 2 about them. This happened and this happened. And this is not a write what you know situation. Of course, it is in a sense write what you know, but it's also something that James has said to us, that history and myth begin in the microcosm of the personal. And so I think what he's after is something really, really big. I mean, he went to the jungles of the Amazon and made Lost City of Z. He went to the outer space and made Ad Astra. And then it's the Eliot thing of like, we shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all exploring will be to arrive home and know the place for the first time. And it feels like...
Sorry, say it one more time. Oh, that was supposed to be funny. Sorry,
everybody. Which is to say, I guess, he's using this very particular, intimate, personal story to tell, I feel, a much bigger story about our era, about the country, about the soul of the country, about this moment where the country sort of lost its way and lost its integrity, happening synonymously with these, with this Armageddon time within this family, and the sort of difficulty of living with integrity when things are pushing against you from all sides.
I'm glad you widened it out. This won't be a spoiler for any of us, we all saw it, but there are Trumps in this movie.
Yeah, there are Trumps in this movie, yeah. And they
and
were there with James,
yeah.
but it's not an accident.
Did he talk to you about what he was going for by including them?
Going for?
Yeah, like what? Did he talk to you about how he wanted them to function in the script?
Not in that way. It wasn't a formula. I don't mean to misunderstand what it is that you're saying, and I mean this in as respectful a way as possible. It wasn't like a formula. It was something that happened to him. And he tells this great story about, I think it's a great story, that he wrote down what he remembered from the Marianne Trump speech, and he said it was like kind of weird, it like imprinted on his brain. And he called his brother and he said, listen, I'm doing this thing, can you I'm not gonna say anything, just write down what you remembered. And they compared them and they were like identical. So I don't know that he was necessarily doing it as you described. I think that it was a part of his experience and an important part of the take on the film about what our values are and where our integrity lies. And he often, when discussing the Trumps and that speech, will quote Texas Governor Ann Richards, who has the quote about George W. Bush, found himself on born on third base, thought he hit a triple. Yeah, so I think that's, if he was trying to show anything, it was kind of the stunning blind hypocrisy of all that.
And also, and James has talked about this, the way that, because I love how kind of incidental it is, and it feels sort of just like it's a thing that's off happening in the wings, that the character kind of intersects, but it's not given too much weight. But James, I think part of his, I don't know if intention is really a word here, but part of what he thinks about is the way that inequality and class and complicity and all of these things are marbled in through the culture. And so it feels to me like seeing Fred Trump is, in the hallway, is just part of the texture of, that is marbled in, to Paul's world.
I'm glad you both clarified that, because I certainly didn't mean it as a sort of
Sid Field
a
maneuver.
I didn't
Yes.
think you did. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine, but it does provide us with another prism maybe to look through this material, like a different way of, and it's sort of oblique. I totally understand the point you're making, and I think that we should let's talk about the way race is handled in this film, because it's very unique and specific, and it's also more about guilt and responsibility. Can you speak to us about maybe how the parents, how Esther and Irving were viewing issues of race in this, and how you were viewing it as actor.
Well, you used the word guilt. A description I heard was that it's about moral regret, which that resonated with me a lot. I think that, James is very clear that he wrote this in the autumn of 2019, which was before the death of George Floyd, which for a lot of the country created a moment of real reckoning. For some people, it was not a new moment of reckoning. And I think that Esther, in particular, she is someone who possesses a lot of the idealism of the 60s. And I think that she's clearly aware of women's lib and clearly wants to be a force of good in the world, and clearly does not have a nuanced and sophisticated understanding of her own complicity in it. And when I think of the events of 2020, that was, I think, when the conversation tipped over into us having a national reckoning about what complicity looks like.
Complicity, right? That feels like the word. The responsibility, maybe, that Paul is just beginning to feel at the age that he's at.
I think, Johnny was James's best friend, and I think it was I know it was very painful for James to sort of revisit this, and I think he is filled with moral regret, and that event specifically has haunted him his whole life. I think it was a way to talk about. I think complicity really is the word in a lot of senses, which is the engine that sort of perpetuates a lot of the racist systems and division and prejudice and as a 12-year-old, I don't know that guilt is the right word, because as a 12-year-old, we're still sentient beings at 12 years old, and we have an understanding of things, but he's choosing in that moment social acceptance over integrity or moral courage. I think in a way for the parents, it's more, there is more guilt, because this father knows that kid's life is never going to be the same again, and it's effectively going to be destroyed by this act. And yet, he wants his children and his son to survive and thrive, and he's had his own experiences of being ostracized, and James was interested in this idea that you can be oppressed and oppressor simultaneously, and how complex that web is. But in the text, when I'm in the car at the end with him, and there's a line about that life is unfair and I hate it, it's the worst thing in the world. There was a stage direction about that he was like being ripped apart inside, because that choice that you're forced to make, and I think great films lead characters to moments of insoluble choices where you can't make the good choice or the heroic choice, and James isn't prescribing any answers. He's just acknowledging the mess of it and the systemic mess of it, and naming these injustices, I think.
So rare to get parts like this that leave these questions unresolved for us to examine and think about. Were these characters difficult to say goodbye to at the end of the shoot?
I was excited to say goodbye, not to the people who, because it's really exciting. Sometimes you go to work and you like everybody. I always like everybody. I love everybody. But something funny happened on this one. We really, really, really found each other as a family. And when it was done, we didn't stop. And, we're all texting all the time. And so we're all still very connected. But I was very excited to let her go, just because she's so full of grief and she's so full of rage, and it's crushing her, and I felt like every day it was hard to breathe because that, when you have to put those filters on and the air is coming through you, I felt myself, like I don't like to get sick for acting, but in this particular case, you sort of can't help it. And then also knowing that my character died a few years after this film takes place of a brain tumor, a brain cancer, and just knowing what we have available to us with modern medicine, that the seeds for that were probably happening during this. I didn't want to make a thing of it, but I wanted to show that this is an unwell person. And, even the things about the headache, I was just like, I know where this leads, even if the audience doesn't. I know what her destiny is. And so just to, we're so lucky as actors, guys. We're so lucky. It blows my mind every single day that we get to take these incredibly complex, oftentimes painful, even devastating things, and we get to choose to understand them better. We get to choose to put ourselves near them, even as close to them as you can get. And then we are allowed the privilege of stepping away from them. So I always try to remember that when I'm playing someone who, for example, in this case, doesn't have my blessing of health. A lot of blessings. So I was ready to kiss her goodbye at the end and get back to feeling a bit like myself.
You know what? I found myself kind of walking around set like whistling all the time. So he's not someone who's particularly in touch with his own inner world and is not a very regulated person and doesn't really have tools. So there was a kind of, he's described in the text as a Jewish Stanley Kowalski with a PhD.
My description was earthy.
And Stanley's pretty happy, he's just going about his day, so whistling bolero and like Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, like the baseline of this character was he's a fantasist in a way, he sees himself as this king in his Camelot and Queens.
You were very entertaining to be on set with, like not the horrible days, but for the most part, you were just like cracking Irving specific jokes. Tell him one.
I don't remember any of them.
Tell him the one about the antenna.
I don't remember.
No, yes, you do. Two radios are getting married. Don't you remember? No. Two radios are getting. I think I remember. Two radios are getting married. Did you hear that? That the two radios got married. The wedding was terrible, but the reception was great.
It's funny because you fill yourself up with all this stuff, but
up with all this stuff.
It's like a rain cloud, and then it's just gone.
He went on for like 15 minutes one take about truss bridges. Truss bridges are the greatest bridge.
It's in the movie. He left it in the movie.
And I hear you guys also stole James's pickles.
Well, no.
Stole is a stole.
I asked, I was cataloging everything he said, and so I asked props to get the Potemkin pickles, which was the kind of pickles that he had, and the photo album on the coffee table book on set was his family photo album. So there was this sort of incredible sense that we were all on this kind of voyage into his past together.
I know we have time for a couple of questions. It's a little hard for us to see, so please raise your hand high and speak loud, right here in front. Yeah.
Wonderful job to both of you. Very much.
Thank you.
Appreciated your work. This question is for Anne. There's a way that you were able to interact with James's character, the young boy, that felt at times frustrating, I think, as an audience, that this mother could let this kid be so, wild and crazy. But then when her father passed, that seemed to shift. And it seemed almost intentional that at that point in the story that we're getting to meet her as a mother, you had a different relationship to the son. Can you just talk about the relationship there and how you sort of crafted that change?
Do we all hear that? It's a question for Anne about her relationship, her character's relationship with the son, and how it shifted.
So just so I understand so it seemed that, first of all, it was James's decision, the level of violence that Esther engages with on screen. and I would leave it to him to answer the what's the word, verisimilitude?
Yep.
I did it. Between what we showed and what it was for him. Also, I trust art. I trust art to be able to show really complicated and contradictory people. And I think that it's something we don't talk about a lot, maybe anywhere in the world, but certainly in America, about the home being a place where love and violence often intersect, love and rage often intersect, and it's not like one just shuts off and the other one comes in. They're not, they don't take turns. They happen on top of each other, and they often, and this is a family that can go from goofy to violent, like that. And I think that's something that is more familiar than maybe we're comfortable talking about in that way. And in terms of what happens when her father dies in that shift, it occurred, I don't remember, I genuinely don't remember if this is something James told me or if this was something I realized for myself, but it informed the character. I realized she was a woman who was almost never touched. There was no, it wasn't really a demonstrative time in that way. Her kids are of an age where like everything she does annoys them. Her husband's not the great source of love and comfort that one would hope for in that relationship. It was really just, and her mother is just so on her about everything. Her mother viewed her as a failure, and the only place that she felt safe and held was her father. So for me, what happened was when he died and Paul tried to comfort her, she couldn't bear to be touched because she only wanted to be touched. She knew that touch, she was never gonna get it again. And she wanted that. So the only choice she had was to like move away from him like he just electrocuted her. Thank you.
Can I have the question?
Oh, just a moment. Here.
Love your chutzpah
Great.
though. It was all of it.
We'll get you. What opened up internally for you as an actor?
With regards to, the question is about what opened up for me. I'm so sorry, I'm trying to find an inroads into the question. Like, as her as a mother,
Yeah, like, what, yeah, like, just how did you personally connect yourself to play that character and being a mother?
that's a great question. It's completely stumped me, clearly. Everyone's just witnessing it. How did I personally, I connected to her because I became an actress in Hollywood in the early, like late 90s, early 2000s, and so often I was the only woman in the room, and specifically the only young girl in the room. And so there, just that feeling of there's a universal and you are not of it, but there's a way to act like you are. In that sense, that idea that she never gets her turn to speak. You know, it's and even when she's listened to, she's not being listened to from someone who has the same a similarity of experience. And that's, you know, for me, one of the most positive things that's been happening in the last few years is there's just this space we're making for people who have not had the space to speak. And actually, when I met James's daughter on set, it's a funny thing when you're playing someone's grandmother, and I got to meet her, and it just kind of came out of me. I said, you are all of her dreams realized. Everything she wanted for herself that was not available to her during her life, they're available for you. And that blew my mind. That blew my mind. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you for it.
And yes, quickly.
This is particularly for the father character. I've been an actor for 30 years, but not as a child. And it was very compelling to me the way that scene was edited when you had to whip the child. And how was that handled for the actor? My husband is coaching children actors right now. How was that handled on set? It was very compelling, but it looked as though you were being very protective of that child. As far as the editing looked like you were never really doing that?
Well, I wasn't hitting them.
Just to be clear.
But I guess the thing is, you have to find a way to get as close to that line, I think, as you possibly can, because what you're being asked to do is embody in the scene a moment of brutality and cruelty that is unfortunately probably universally recognizable on some level. And so fundamentally it has to be safe. It has to, that chaos needs to exist within a controlled environment. But I would say that Annie did more to check in. I needed to know that my scene partner was, I checked in my own way to see sort of what his comfort level was, and I had someone give him a safe word in case he felt at any point remotely uncomfortable. But I needed for there to be tension and a feeling of danger in that environment that day. So it's a fine line, and also that, it's different. It's like if you look at this boy's life, I don't think you could make that movie now. I mean, they're hitting each other, and like we rightfully have traveled a distance towards making sure that even though he's an actor, he's still 12 years old, and so it's our responsibility as the adults to make sure fundamentally that he's safe. But it is a question, art on some level is not about being safe, and so it's how do you capture the reality of that dynamic in that scene through artifice. I don't know the answer. I'm probably not the best
Thank you
person to
for
answer.
the bravery of that scene. As a child who did receive the strap, married to a man who does not understand the context of that because his resistance is so different. That's what art is for, and so thank you for your bravery of that scene. I saw the truth of that.
Thank you so much.
May I add something as well? And I'm so sorry for your experience, and I hope you're healing from it, and I'm glad that you found a home that's full of love, and that's safe. Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the keys to that day was making sure that Jeremy's process had enough space, and that we were making it as positive an experience for Banks the actor as we could, because I think that there might be this sort of tendency in mythologizing, misunderstanding of the idea that in order to play someone being abused, you need to be abused. And so we began by empowering Banks. Obviously James was going through a lot. We're filming something very close to him, and Jeremy was acting, and I was off camera for a lot of that scene, so I went up to Banks beforehand, and before the first take, and I said, sweetie, I just want to say that, we all really believe in you, and you're a wonderful actor, and we know you have this, and we're really excited to see what you can do. And he said, thank you. And then I left, and then we did the scene, and we were all completely devastated. And then they yelled cut, and I ran back in to check on him. And I go, Banks, are you okay? And he jumped up and he goes, that was the one. And I think that, let actors act.
He did come up to me, sorry,
but what I was going to say is we didn't just go to Banks. Banks's mother, Nana, was an amazing partner in navigating all of these things. And anything I had to do with Banks physically, I told him about it precisely ahead of time because I have a process that can do that. And I went to her, and I described it to her, and I asked her if I could demonstrate it on her. I think we have to be very, very, very clear up front, a lot of advanced preparation, so that way you can create an environment where you can really risk it and really go there, an environment that's so safe you can portray violence without anybody getting hurt. That's what we should all be going for, in my opinion.
It's very
I
sensitive.
didn't mean to cut you off. What did you want to say? Because you and Banks had your own conversation about it.
No, just, I sort of, I tended to not say very much to Banks while we were working, unless there were days where the energy was sort of ebullient and enjoying each other. But that day, he came up to me before and said, "Listen, I just want you to know, like, I want to do this scene, and I'm here, and I'm game, and I'll do anything." And, James had told me about his experiences with his father, and they were worse than what was in the film, and they were worse than what was on, and what's in the film is worse than what was on the page. There was not on the page, "I don't come back in and grab him," and those other words that I say, that wasn't on the page. But I felt like Banks gave me permission, and he said something to me in that moment, and that was all just sort of unfolded. That was one take, but he was as present and committed a scene partner as I've ever had.
And that's the one thing that I just want to add, because you mentioned that your husband is coaching child actors. Banks was an unbelievable partner in all of this and wanted to be there and wanted to match you step for step. And his whole thing was, if you bring it, I can bring it. If you bring it, I can bring it, which puts even more onus on you as the adult professional to make sure that that kid is safe, because we know what eagerness can do. We know how eagerness can be mistreated, taken advantage of. It became even more important that we took this bright, shining, open heart light who just wanted to do a great job and who is 12 years old, and we protected that. So that way it was just about him acting, that's all.
The results are extraordinary. Let's thank our guests.